o marang mola mayap aungil madangali arngula bela
malungil silsil moraro guil adal kukmos edet makare elange tianga iliakl el programa Udesuall maldi qadi qide batay mak molingit lo setibol de odel bungum di ko tokam digil aktimosyo artikal ad yolingit mos el bukmu gel to ngam close to tlel tikal ada kolabal mei di era bosegi de ku aiselo asa olbira glula senetre elia kilingera resolution no trogo krasenkyo el morngira July 11 sesenkyo mo o sigren gel mom era adam rasenetra a senator Jonathan Udesuall el Maria Meldiring isa Friday lo matakra abililio ediregal el alsil se armanga takleda ngara blura korea ngara president surang whips mar bebira ngara bladlo bangel el nora ondi bra blura korea ma blura pacific el alsil maklugu lukuk mamsa dagel el togol dradong lela blura korea mang se orngi el meragal blura pacific l'ultimo kra ablur belao el alto tave ngani tigal terul o kial el obangetel ya angartiang ngani ya klol toil beret blur belao obangetel atian omreka sunday el masadring el obangela adagablement ma adra dastal el combali ma adra ais el girel atgora corruption atgo amrigel o mga bas el klalo rabuay mengkalangan tiang mo ngitertil aktimo mo clear gelu elang clear emro ngitertil mo syogarti mengaringia Jan ngartiang ma Annika ngartiang. So good morning, let me welcome you again to Palau. Understand you've been here for over a week now, and we're very happy to have you as the guest of Palau. And I understand last week you spoke, during the workshop and the conference with government officials on Monday and Tuesday. So I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself and where you came from and why are you here. And I understand you got stuck due to typhoon in Guam, so we're happy that we'll be able to have the chance to speak with you publicly. So, Annika.
Good morning, Moses, and thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm Annika Wythes. I'm with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime and have had the privilege of coming into Palau a number of times over the years. Last year, we were also in town in August, but last week we were able to work with the special prosecutor and her team on the back of a survey that she did that about 1% of the population responded to, and I know that you've spoken a little bit about it on the show, and there was a lot of interest in that. And then on Tuesday, we worked with the Attorney General, and she invited a range of different stakeholders from government, private sector, media, and also civil society to really look at the UN Convention Against Corruption. And if I may, Moses, it is a framework to which Palau signed up to. So it is the only international legally binding anti-corruption instrument. It's been in existence for 20 years this year, and it's a bit like a toolbox, I like to refer to it as. Essentially, you may not use everything in your toolbox all the time, but if you have a framework in place, it definitely allows you to draw on it. And the nice thing about, we call it UNCAC, the UN Convention Against Corruption, in that it is holistic. So it doesn't just look at corruption in the public sector, but also in the private sector. It includes all of society. And it also has four main elements to it. And it kind of goes to your point in what we're discussing before the show started in terms of corruption prevention. So when we look at corruption prevention, we often say that prevention is better than a cure. And what do we mean by that? So by focusing on prevention, we can reduce corrupt behavior. And I know that over the last week, this discussion has been going on of how do we really do that? Is it through kind of even looking at our education system, a kind of morals-based education? For example, if you have a P class, a sports class, and teaching children not to cheat, Is that one element that you can draw on? You can integrate it into different subjects as students and children go through. But really, when it comes to prevention, here we really want to look at, be it anti-corruption policies and strategies. We're looking at who does what, which bodies are involved. So here, of course, you have the special prosecutor who plays a big role, but not just her. You have the auditor, the public auditor, you have the police, you have the Attorney General, and you have many different people that are all included in this. And of course, we look a little bit at ensuring transparency, of course, too, be it in the funding of political parties and candidates. We look at also access to information. We look at preventing conflicts of interest. How do you report corruption? What about codes of conduct? We've spoken a fair bit about codes of conduct in relation to the public sector. What about the private sector? I guess I could ask you, Moses, do you have a code of conduct here at the station? So there are many different aspects to prevention. Then you look at criminalizing corrupt behavior and law enforcement. And of course, corruption knows no boundaries. So it's about international cooperation. And there you can use the UN Convention Against Corruption as an instrument. So you don't need to go and sign a lot of bilateral treaties with other countries. You can use it as your legal basis. And last but not least is asset recovery. So if the proceeds of crime are overseas from Palau, then how can you bring that back to Palau? And indeed, you can use the convention as a legal basis to do so. Countries around the world have done it. So there's a little bit of a snapshot about that.
Before we go deeper into that, John, can you
Yes,
tell the people who you are, and you
Okay.
still look the same since last time we were in the station.
Thank you very much, Moses. I think I should be getting a stamp. It's, I think, my 5th or 6th time on your morning programs here. But I'm John Hyde. I'm an anti-corruption consultant with the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, and I've been working with Annika for about 10 years in the Pacific, and I've been very fortunate to come with her a number of times. And of course, we were here last August with you, but my trip before that was the famous last flight out of Palau at COVID, so in March 2020. And I think I'd done your show the day before or 2 days before, and little did we know the world would change. But it's great to be back, and great to see the emphasis that the media's putting on reporting corruption and discussing it, and the great work by the Special Prosecutor last week and the Attorney General to create a safe space where Palauans can talk about corruption and, of course, how complex it is here.
Before you go, tell us again, where are you from and where are you based?
Okay.
How long have you been doing this?
Okay, I was a Member of Parliament in Australia in 2000 to 2013 in Western Australia, and I chaired the Corruption and Crime Commission oversight and set up the legislation to establish our Anti-Corruption Commission in Perth, Western Australia. Then after I left Parliament, I joined the UN out of the regional office in Bangkok in Thailand, but most of my work's been, luckily, here in the 14 Pacific countries.
Mm-hmm. I understand there's an agreement or a protocol that was signed some years ago about corruption. Can you explain?
Yep. Well, Taeniwa Vision is the Pacific's roadmap on anti-corruption. So Annika's talked about the UN Convention Against Corruption, which has 189 signatories around the world.
Including Palau?
Including Palau. Palau was, Annika, 2009 signed the big one. But President Whipps, as one of the Pacific Islands Forum leaders, endorsed Taeniwa Vision as the regional roadmap in February 2021. So that was 1 year after we had the big Te Iniwa Vision Conference and workshops in Kiribati in February 2020, and I came straight from Kiribati here to Palau for that last pre-COVID.
Was there any Palauan representation then?
No, the Attorney General got to the airport and then Palau instituted some travel early COVID. Okay. So you were one of the first COVID countries, so the Attorney General couldn't join us.
Okay.
Actually, Palau and Niue, representatives pulled out at the last moment. But then the President, of course, when it was brought up officially at PIFs, so the 18 PIFs leaders, including the Francophone dependencies, they've also signed on with it there. And in many ways, it's a condensed version of the UN Convention. But it talks about the issues and the challenges for the Pacific countries, such as Palau.
So let me ask this question. Why this? Why doing this in the Pacific? Do we have corruption here?
I think it'd be fair to say that every country is not immune from corruption, and as we know, there's no country that's immune, essentially. And I think one illustration very much is that we have 189 countries on board with the UN Convention Against Corruption. So everybody acknowledges that we should really be working towards a corrupt-free society, and we need a framework. But of course, that's only a framework. It's only as good as what you do in country. I think last week, the special prosecutor, she wanted to ask Palauans about corruption here and how it is that you can learn from what the answers were. So where is it that people are reporting corruption? What are they seeing? How can they do things? And I think always to contextualize it and not to compare yourself to other countries, but to compare yourself to yourself, if that makes sense.
So can you give some concrete examples of corruption as you both experience or have seen it in the Pacific or in Asia? And we don't want to look into the context in Palau because you guys leave tonight or tomorrow. I'll be here, so I'm getting into trouble. So can you give kind of simple examples of people listening in others? Oh yeah, this is corruption.
There are many examples, be it, for example, a procurement process. So there's an open bid and many people put in to build a specific road. And then somebody decides to bribe somebody on the procurement board to favor their bid, where they're not the best, but they then win it. And indeed, the road is built with substandard, material, and maybe it cracks in a few years' time. And so the person who's pocketed the money, they benefit, but not the community.
So let me ask you, so is it the corruption, let's say, for the government official to award the contract to a contractor with maybe less ability because the contractor happened to be a brother-in-law or a friend or a cousin or a close relative? Is that the corruption?
So in the example I gave was about bribery where they received money, but indeed it should be an open, transparent process whereby the best person who is providing the best service to the government and therefore to the people is awarded a contract. And there's often clear criteria and you have to fulfill that criteria. And this is why we often say it's good to be very open and transparent. So when there is a tender, it's open. When there is bidding going on to see who is bidding, and some countries go to the extent of even putting that online, and then who wins the bid is also public, so everybody can see and why it is that they won. And if there's an appeal process, there should be that in place too. So there's an entire system, and this is what the framework that we've been talking about with the UN Convention Against Corruption provides. But that's just one example. I'm not sure, John, do you want to use another example?
Well, I guess most of the time we talk about money, but I think that issue of nepotism, and it blends with the issue of culture, where people sometimes aren't able to divorce their government role or their private sector role with their family or cultural obligations. And so they feel that when a member of their family wants to get a particular job, a position, or a contract, or import something, that they should have preference over others purely because of the relationship. And I think one of the benefits in Palau is you've got a very free media and open society, so a lot of things do get talked about. But I think what I'm intuiting, if that's a verb, this time round is in many Pacific communities, it's not good to be putting your dirty laundry out in public. So it's better if somebody in your business or your church or your sporting club is stealing membership money or some other funds that have come in, that you try and deal with it quietly, because you don't want your sporting club or your church to be exposed as having this stain. But I think what's now happening are people are realising we actually need to provide a deterrent. So we need to be showing everybody, if you do the wrong thing, if you're stealing, if you take something that doesn't belong from you, if you're replacing bad medicines in a hospital with cheap imports that are no good and saying that they're the best, then you actually need to be prosecuted, because if there's publicity, it deters somebody else from doing the same thing. And I'm sensing in the Pacific that we're moving towards that. No, corruption's always been there, but people are saying the old ways haven't worked. Yes, we have to respect cultural obligations, but we need the honest discussion so as we know what is culture, but what is thievery, what is bribery. It's not culture, and you can differentiate.
Let me give you an example that something that I personally have been involved in government work. So I guess this falls under nepotism. The officials hire relatives. So I work with several states. I represent them, so I tell them, I said, hey, this is not right. Why bring your nephew or niece relative to work, or even your children? He said, and this is something which is interesting. He said, there's no available resources. I mean, individual who are qualified to do this, and there's no interest. And when I get my relative to work, I can trust that he or she can do the work. And then he can work outside of working hours without getting overtime pay, because the state government are so poor. So, and I can, like on weekends, I can just call them and say, hey, go do this. They do it because of the loyalty to the boss who's a relative. So how is that? And I'm sure I've traveled throughout Micronesia and also in the Pacific, and I've seen it so many times. So people hiring their close relatives to work for them in the government. So that's considered nepotism. That's considered corruption. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, it should be a merit-based recruitment process. And if indeed you are sitting on the board and you are recruiting somebody who is your family member, then it's a conflict of interest. So you declare the conflict. Conflicts occur all the time, but it's how you address them that's really important, and how it is that you go about them. So maybe you get removed from that recruitment process because of it. There are different ways to deal with it, but I think it's very important, and this is what we look at under the UN Convention Against Corruption, is really to have competition and objective kind of means to recruiting the best into the public service that we can. And indeed, perhaps, a relative is the best qualified person, but allow them to get it on merit, and to say that there is a conflict, and for somebody else to make that decision that indeed they are the best qualified and they deserve it based on what their qualifications are and that they can best do the job.
What about, let me give you an example in Palau. We have a capital which is like several miles away from Coro, so a lot of people stay here, including the lawmakers, and they drive there. So they get cars, they get government cars to drive, and then they get government fuel to drive to sessions and to work. But it's far. But we know it's only 25 days out of each quarter they have session, the rest are no session, but they have committee work. And will that, is that kind of, can you say that's a form of corruption by, using government cars, government fuel to do their work, but only part-time and not full-time? Then you can see them driving government cars to customs, to church, to, bring their, children to school. I mean, that's a real problem here.
Yeah, but again, it's an issue of transparency. So when somebody signs a contract, if a condition of your employment is having access to a car, then it's got to have the specifics in there. Is it a car for only official use, or is it a car for personal use as well during the week or not? Before I was in politics, I was a mayor. We had an issue with a CEO where a car was provided, but on the weekends the car was being used for a personal business that an employee was using. And clearly, because we had a contract that said car for official use with the council and also private inconsequential travel, but not business travel. So again, it goes back to that transparency. So if anybody's getting a government job, their conditions of employment should be public. And if they were all public, if we had this, and you do have an Open Government Act here, 2014, but if it was implemented fully and people could go online and see the employment contracts, it'd stop the jealousy or the comments that weren't needed, but it would also help workers to know what's right, what's wrong.
So I guess we've been independent only for 29 years, so we're still learning the rope of being on your own and running your own things. So I think maybe, for public officers, especially the top leaders, maybe there should be like guidelines in terms of code of ethics or something that specify that this minister is entitled to, full vehicle, use 24 hours, or the delegates or the senators, and they're entitled to so much, like the fuel a month or something, so that at least it's open, and it's a policy adopted openly, so people know that instead of just getting into rumor mill and then they get. I think it's reaching a point where people are just gonna do things to stop this, So what do you think? I mean, because this is a real problem here.
Yeah, again, it's the transparency issue. If an elected official, and it's a privilege to be an elected official. It's a privilege to have a high status job in any community, and in many ways you've got to be showing by example. And that issue of, okay, should I be lending my car to the church or to the sporting group? But it's a government car. It's government petrol that's being paid from the taxes of hardworking people like Moses and others. So there's really got to be an understanding from leaders about what is purely for government use or purely allowed under your contract and what isn't. And I know there's a lot of pressure from your church, from family, from sporting groups and others, but perhaps the work that we're doing and helping with the Attorney General and the Office of Special Prosecutor, every time we have these discussions, these surveys, is that people in the community get an understanding, and maybe it helps them not to be asking leaders for things that they shouldn't be. There's responsibility both ways.
What about these surveys that you saw the result publicized or disclosed by the Special Prosecutor last Monday and Tuesday? What do you think about the result of the surveys? I mean, it's kind of jive with the rest of Pacific as to like the reporting, afraid to report, and also afraid to take action, or
I think firstly to say that it's a great initiative that the government had in really wanting to understand from citizens what the issue is and how it is that government and also the public at large can address these issues. So really to commend the special prosecutor and her office for doing it in the first place. Of course, it is perception. And it is also based on the experiences that people, of course, have lived. And it's only a sample size of the population, so it's not an entire population. But it really was, I think, eye-opening for many in the room. And I can only say for myself that I think it really illustrated that there were people that were seeing corruption taking place and they weren't reporting it. And they weren't reporting it in part because they didn't know to who they could go, or if they necessarily believed that that would be the best avenue for their complaint to go. And I think this is where it was very telling of government to say, how can we work on better with advocacy and awareness raising and informing people about where they can also report corruption when it takes place. And then, of course, that trust in government to do something about it. I think it also links in with the fact that here we're talking about events that have occurred and how can you deal with it. And some of the discussion in the workshops also reflect on how can we prevent it. Because by investigating, prosecuting, adjudicating on cases, indeed that's a deterrence, as we were talking about before. But how is it that we can also work with the community to make sure this doesn't even take place in the first instance? There were a lot of findings underneath it, and I think I was very much the observer, which was an honor to be there and part of. But some of these discussions here are not unique only to Palau. They are across the board, and I think that's really important to know. That some of the challenges that you're facing are indeed the challenges across the ocean. And this is why also the Taniwa vision that John mentioned, it uses the word sail and canoe, that we have to work together, and it's that unity against corruption as we sail through rough seas. John, your reflections maybe on the survey too.
Yeah, I think it was good because there was a lot of questions. So often you get vox pop, where people say, is there corruption or not? Mm. And then from one question on social media, people say that this is evidence of. But I think what was good here is it really went behind what are the reasons, what prevents you from reporting. And I think one of the telling points there, and it's something that comes out in some Pacific countries, was a fear of losing your job or being discriminated in employment. So if I make an official complaint, then that will have repercussions for me. That stops me doing it. And you can look at some countries, say the Tonga, for example, where under there, and every Pacific country has got a different integrity framework. In Tonga, the ombudsman is the main integrity officer and has a huge reputation for confidentiality. So even people, when they feel somebody in their family is doing something incredibly wrong, they've been able to go to the ombudsman, nobody knows where the complaints come from, and it's dealt with independently. So I think what really came out of this survey was perhaps a plea from people in Palau, tell us where can we go safely or how can we safely report. It's not just about being able to click on a box, because many people with scams and everything, there's even though the best system in the world might be with one of your agencies here, unless you're telling people and reassuring them, yes, if you click on this button on our website, we won't even know where it's come from.
And I think, John, this also very much linked with a lot of the information we've been hearing throughout, that citizens want greater transparency and therefore accountability in what's taking place. Because also in the reporting, on the flip side, the question is, do you have a whistleblower protection mechanism in place? If you report to the public auditor, you do, but you do not have a comprehensive whistleblower protection system. And that can also impact why people may not feel confident to come forwards. One of the interesting findings in the survey was also the link to sexual harassment in the workplace. I think that was an interesting one that could be picked up by other people in government, as to just really reflect on that and see what's going and dig a little bit deeper. So there were some results, I think, in the survey that are relevant beyond necessarily what the drafters had intended, and reflective of what the situation is, of course, of the sample size that answered.
In the surveys, it shows that a lot of people report, the survey, but as to, to go to a proper authority or to get it solved, people don't, in the survey they said they saw the incident, but as to reporting, that's another question. So I think during the workshop, it became clear that there's a reporting side, and there's the enforcement side. Because many people in the survey says, they don't think anything is going to be done about it. So that's why, why we, trouble, going through it. So it's interesting, as I indicate during the workshop, that Palau, I think, has 6 entities involved in the, enforcement of law, particularly any corruption. I mean, we have the AG office, we have special prosecutor, we have public auditor who was very passionate, and then we have the ombudsman, we even have a GAO, and we have an ethics commission. There's 6, but somehow they're different. They are at different level of the government. They're financed poorly, except like the AG office and the special prosecutor and public auditor, and they're kind of working independently from each other. So it's kind of scattered way of enforcing this law. So, I mean, seeing that, what's your, especially a small country like this?
It's also representative, though, particularly in a smaller country. If you just had one integrity agency, you'd have huge conflicts of interest. And corruption is such a complex issue. So by having an ethics commission that is purely dealing with declarations by leaders, whether they've done the right thing, but having that separate from the police or separate from another prosecuting body, is actually a good practice in a small country. So, but again, it's all about getting it right. You wouldn't want to have 23 different agencies, but you've got to constantly be re-evaluating. Are each of the 6 or 10 or how many they are fit for purpose? And I think that's the key. There's not a magic number anywhere, but it's whether they're each doing their roles. And I think the important thing of the work that we're doing with Attorney General, Special Prosecutor, the Auditor General, he's doing some amazing work as well, is looking at the gaps.
Sorry, Moses, to jump in, also the financial intelligence unit that focuses on the money laundering side of things. So there are many sides to this coin, and I think you nailed it quite well in saying there needs to be coordination amongst them. Everybody has a specific mandate, but how well are they all working together? And of course, also working with sectors of society, working with the private sector, and also working with citizens. And it goes again to that thing of each integrity agency, how transparent and open are they actually with the public? Is it on the website? Can you see? For example, you go to the special prosecutor's website and you can report corruption also anonymously. That, I think, is also very good because some people don't want to necessarily have their name attached to it. But you need to provide enough information because she won't be able to go back to that person. So she only can use the information you give, so you have to provide as much as much detail as possible in order for her to look into it and investigate. And some of these things take a very long time because, as we know, corruption cases are complicated. They don't also only take place here in Palau, so you may need to work with other countries in order to get evidence and information. And one of the things that we can also see, because Palau was evaluated against the UN Convention Against Corruption, and I just bring this up now as it's also authorities that have raised it as a priority, how effective are your penalties? So indeed, if you are deemed to have committed X corrupt behavior, be it embezzlement, bribery, abuse of office, whatever it may be, what is the penalty? And here it has been said, and it is also one of the priorities of government, that at the moment we need to look at effective and proportionate punishment. So if you only slap somebody on the wrist, is that really enough of a deterrence for somebody doing it again? Because maybe they'll only catch me 1 of 10 times, and if they catch me 1 time and the penalty is nothing, then that's not really deterring me from doing it. So you need to have penalties that are reflective of what the crime was.
Okay, we're coming to an end. So one of the things that I like to, you to tell the public is, so what happened now? You represent the United Nations international body in this area, in the specific issue of anti-corruption and crimes. You come here, you've been coming here for so many years or so many trips. Now you go back. So the question is, so what? So what happened now? What we can draw from here? Any meaningful follow-up, or you go back and then everybody go back to the office and said, okay, Janet, Annika, over here, nice meeting you and all that stuff. But so what?
I think the great thing is that really in addressing corruption, it's for you as Palauans to do. We can only support you in this process. And to really commend the Attorney General, who now is seen and listened, and a lot of people have prioritized what we should be looking at in the fight against corruption. She's seeking to have a national anti-corruption strategy. She wants to develop this strategy that brings in not only government, not only the private sector, media, but also civil society. And for it to be a holistic way in which Palau says you want to address corruption. And what is included in that is for Palau to decide. And that will be actionable, deliverables, who's doing what, by when, by what time, and you will drive that process. And that is really key, I think, for next steps going forwards. And it will include various different aspects to it and many different people in it. But it is great to have it on paper as something that is actionable and specific and targeted going forwards.
So that can be I guess, the byproduct of your visit here, and then also, like I understand in Fiji, the assistant SP was here and told us that they incorporate into the school curriculum, and that's kind of new,
Yeah. So there's all these other ways that we work regionally and remotely, such as providing with education systems in health departments, in hospitals. Just last week, one of the investigators, Office Special Prosecutor, we took to Brisbane for regional training that's improving their skills as investigators. It's another area that we provide, or the UNODC provides, ongoing technical assistance at that real operational level. But also these 10 days we've been here, we've kept doing our work with the private sector, with civil society and the media, and I believe tomorrow we're going to finally be doing a code of conduct workshop with media in Palau, so as there is an official code of conduct to guide their important work. Because we might be on the plane this week, but next week the newspapers, your show here, everywhere else will keep doing and interpreting anti-corruption and ethical stories, and which is great. So you're the ones carrying it on.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult subject to deal with. Also, because we always think of United Nations as bringing programs and project for water, for all kind of project for. So now, United Nations coming in to tell us, our government officials are corrupt or people are doing this. So it's kind of a negative thing. It's not a positive thing. But I think, I guess. Now I understand it's more of, I guess, education and for us so that we know, because we're a new country, so we're going through the ropes. So we're happy and glad that you made this visit. We hope you come back again, and so we're gonna, I guess, end. I'll give you the first to make, I guess, parting. Comments?
Okay. Look, it's very much, we're not coming in with the tablets of stone to give to you in many ways. And, I think over the 10 years we've been coming here, there's more and more capacity of Palauans to deal with integrity issues their own way. And I think that's the wonderful reason I want to keep coming back, because I keep seeing the way you're developed, and you're teaching us things as well. You've got a lot to teach other communities. So I just say keep up the good work, Palau. The flip side of having an open media and an open society is that you are able to talk about difficult things. But the other good side of that means that you're able to deal with it in your way and get the solutions. So thanks very much, and looking forward to following you on YouTube and in the print.
Okay. Your closing argument.
Thank you. I wanted to close with actually a quote, actually. I think it sums up a lot of what we've been discussing, if I may. And it's by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He really said something that I think resonates. He said that corruption is not only immoral, but it is a serious crime. It is often organized and crosses borders, but most importantly, it betrays people and democracy. It steals trillions of dollars from people all over the world, usually the most in need, and it siphons off resources for sustainable development. When powerful people get away with corruption, people lose trust in their governing institutions. Turning the tide against corruption is essential if we are to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, promote peace and protect human rights. So really thank you again for having us here, and it's really a great privilege to be able to support Palauans in their fight against corruption. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I guess now the typhoon is gone, so you'll be able to leave Palau, but I'm sure it was a good experience to relax another week, and then thanks for that. Is that tomorrow we're going to have the...
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much for your time, and we're very happy to see you. And as we say in Palau, Mauriul, we don't say goodbye, we say until later.
Oh, until later.
Komano masaul di lage, menmuter all time.
Arngul belaw, isay yaul, akmul kmogon.